The sun had barely begun its climb, casting long, trembling rays over the grand estate that seemed to swallow the horizon. The air was thick with anticipation, carrying a faint mixture of perfume, leather, and the faint dust of wealth accumulated over generations. Servants scurried along cobbled pathways, their crisp steps echoing like a soft percussion in the immense courtyard. Today was not merely another day of frivolous social display, it was the day of the auction, the day when Omega girls, rare, beautiful, and often overlooked, were paraded before the eyes of the elite, each hoping for a chance to claim the one they desired. Among the neatly arranged stalls and ornately decorated stages, a figure moved quietly, almost unseen. She was small in stature, with hair like spilled ink and eyes that shimmered with the muted light of unspoken sorrow. The folds of her gown, simple compared to the extravagance of others, clung to her slender frame like a whisper. She had been rejected countless times, pushed aside, ignored, and whispered about as if her very presence was a blemish. Her name was whispered only in pity, not in admiration. Lyra, the Omega who had been cast aside, the girl no one wanted. The crowd gathered, voices blending into a sea of murmurs and occasional sharp laughter, each person confident in their ability to claim the finest among the available Omegas. The stage was a spectacle, draped in velvet, adorned with golden railings, and lined with soft, crimson cushions. And yet, for all its grandeur, it did little to soften the cruel eyes that watched Lyra as she was led onto the platform. She moved with quiet dignity, her gaze fixed on the floor, though she could feel the weight of countless judgments pressing upon her. The auctioneer, a man with a voice that carried the authority of generations, raised his hand and called the proceedings to order. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come to witness the presentation of those who seek the favor of our noble alphas. Let the bidding begin. And so, the parade started. Each Omega moved with elegance and charm, displaying the qualities that had made them desirable: beauty, grace, charm, and, most importantly, the subtle magnetism of rarity. Each bid that rang out echoed with triumph, the clink of gold coins and the pleased murmur of spectators marking the fate of the girl on the stage. Then came Lyra's turn. The room fell into a hush, though not one of admiration. Her appearance drew polite glances, but the judgments were heavy, coated in disdain and the memory of previous failures. She felt every whisper, every sidelong glance, the way her soft brown eyes were measured and found lacking. One by one, the bids rose for the others, and one by one, the Omega girls were claimed. The stage grew emptier and the air colder as Lyra's name was spoken last, almost as an afterthought. Next, the last Omega, the auctioneer announced, his tone void of hope. Lyra, the rejected. A few murmurs of pity rose from the crowd. Some chuckled discreetly, others looked away, uncomfortable with the obvious narrative of her rejection. But in that moment, Lyra lifted her chin, a quiet defiance stirring in her chest. She would not crumble. She would not beg. She was here, and she would face whatever fate the world offered. As the bids were called, there was silence. A few hesitant numbers were raised, but none serious, none committed. It seemed as if the world had forgotten her, as if she was destined to vanish from memory yet again. Then, the air shifted. A presence entered the hall, commanding without a word, demanding attention simply by the authority it exuded. A hush fell over the crowd, whispers dying mid-word. He arrived, the Alpha King, the one whose name alone had the power to change fates. His eyes, sharp and commanding, swept across the room, landing on Lyra with an intensity that made the air vibrate. There was no need for words, the decision was already made in the depths of his gaze. 30,000, he declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. The amount was staggering, yet no one dared question it. The auctioneer faltered, astonished, and the crowd murmured in awe. Lyra froze, the words sinking into her chest. 30,000, she had been rejected for years, dismissed as unworthy, overlooked as ordinary. And yet here he was, offering everything for her. Her heart raced, but she did not speak, afraid that even a whisper might shatter this fragile miracle. The Alpha King stepped forward, his presence undeniable, his hand extended, not in command, but in a silent promise. Lyra felt a warmth she had never known, a recognition, a validation. In that instant, the world shifted beneath her feet, the long years of rejection, of loneliness, of being unseen, fading into insignificance against the brilliance of this single moment. And so, the rejected Omega was claimed, not for pity, not for amusement, but for something deeper, something that promised a future unimagined. The auction ended, the crowd dispersed, and Lyra's life, once confined to shadows, opened to light she had never dared to hope for. Yet, this was only the beginning. The halls of the estate were silent as she was led away, her thoughts a whirl of disbelief and tentative hope. What did this mean? Why her? Could someone as powerful, as revered as the Alpha King, truly see her, not as the rejected Omega, but as someone worth everything? The journey ahead promised danger, intrigue, and challenges that would test the very core of her being. But for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to imagine a life not defined by rejection but by acceptance, by love, and by the possibility of becoming more than she had ever dreamed. The Alpha King watched her, the flicker of a rare smile crossing his face. He had chosen her not because she was flawless, but because she was real, because in her quiet resilience, he saw something extraordinary, something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth loving. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted in bruised purples and molten oranges, a fleeting moment of beauty that mirrored Lyra's own conflicted heart. She walked beside the Alpha King, her steps careful, her hands trembling slightly though she could not explain why. The grandeur of the estate, with its towering columns and sprawling gardens, had never felt so overwhelming. Every corner seemed alive with history, with stories of power, privilege, and expectation. And yet, in the midst of it all, Lyra felt painfully, achingly small. The Alpha King walked with a quiet assurance that made every shadow seem to straighten in respect. His presence was magnetic, not in the brash, showy way many nobles used to command attention, but in a calm, unyielding authority that spoke of strength tempered by wisdom. Lyra found herself instinctively adjusting her posture, lowering her gaze, and yet, she did not feel afraid. It was something more complicated, something like awe mixed with the raw ache of disbelief. "You may rest," he said finally, his voice a low, even rumble that seemed to reverberate through the marble halls. There was no cruelty in it, no superiority, only a steady command that drew obedience as naturally as the sun rises. Lyra nodded, her throat tight, words failing her entirely. She had imagined this moment countless times in whispered fantasies during lonely nights, yet the reality, standing here, alone with the man who had claimed her, was more potent than anything she had dreamed. She was led to her chambers, a suite that reflected a perfect balance of luxury and comfort. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with volumes she could not yet hope to read, and large windows framed the garden outside where fountains glittered like scattered diamonds in the moonlight. A soft carpet muffled her steps, and the bed, grand and inviting, seemed almost to mock her with its size. Lyra hesitated at the threshold, taking in the room as if it were a painting she had no right to touch. The Alpha King's gaze followed her, quiet but unwavering, and she felt herself shrink under its intensity. Yet even as nerves coiled tight in her chest, a small spark of warmth kindled, a strange, almost impossible sense that she belonged here, even if she could not yet understand why. "I have arranged for your comfort," he said. His tone measured. "You will find everything you need within these walls. Tomorrow, we begin your lessons, not of etiquette or refinement, but of understanding this world, of understanding me. Only then can we walk forward together." Lyra's fingers twitched at her sides. Lessons? Understanding him? She had never imagined herself in such a place, let alone under the tutelage of someone as formidable as the Alpha King. Yet the thought, rather than frightening her, ignited a tiny flame of curiosity. Perhaps this was more than just survival, it was an opportunity to grow, to rise above the girl who had been rejected all her life. The evening passed slowly, marked by silence more than conversation. The Alpha King did not hover, nor did he demand attention. He was there, a steady presence at the edge of her awareness, giving her space to acclimate, yet his eyes never left her entirely. When he spoke, it was deliberate, each word weighted with intention, each phrase revealing layers of complexity she could not yet hope to unravel. Lyra found herself walking the gardens under the moonlight, the cool breeze tangling in her hair, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and wet earth. Her reflection in the dark water of a fountain showed a girl she barely recognized, a girl who had been overlooked, dismissed, and abandoned. And yet, something had shifted. The Alpha King had seen her. He had chosen her. For the first time, she felt the tremor of hope in her chest, a sensation that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He walked beside her, silent at first, allowing her to take in the world as she needed. Then, after a moment that stretched between them like a fragile thread, he spoke. "Lyra," he said softly, almost as if testing the sound of her name on his tongue. "I do not choose lightly. You are not here by accident, and I do not intend for you to be caged by expectation or fear. You are mine, yes, but that does not mean you are powerless. You are here to grow, to learn, to discover what you are capable of." She looked up at him then, startled by the intensity of his gaze, by the sincerity etched in every line of his face. I don't know what I'm capable of," she admitted quietly. The words trembled like fragile glass, but they carried the truth she had carried for years, the gnawing fear of inadequacy that had shadowed her entire life. "You will," he said simply. "And I will be there. Not to command you, but to guide you. And when the time comes, you will see yourself as I see you." The gardens were silent except for the rustle of leaves and the soft lap of water against stone. Lyra felt the weight of the moment pressing gently against her soul. It was not just hope she felt, it was possibility. The kind of possibility that could rewrite a lifetime of rejection, of loneliness, of despair. By the time they returned to the estate, Lyra's mind was a storm of questions and emotions. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, nor the days that followed, but a single, unshakable truth had taken root in her heart. She would not remain the girl who was unwanted. Not if the Alpha King believed in her. Not if he had seen something extraordinary within her quiet resilience. As she lay in the soft sheets, staring at the ceiling, she allowed herself a small, trembling smile. For the first time in her life, she felt the stirrings of belonging, of being seen, not as a mistake, not as the rejected Omega, but as someone extraordinary, someone chosen, someone capable of love, and of a future she had never dared to imagine. And somewhere in the quiet shadows of the estate, the Alpha King watched, satisfied. Not because she was perfect, not because she needed him, but because he had glimpsed the spark that even years of rejection could not extinguish. And in that spark, he saw the beginning of a life neither of them would ever forget. The morning light spilled into Lyra's chambers with the gentle insistence of a new beginning. Pale rays filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the walls lined with books and delicate tapestries, their colors muted in the dawn. For the first time in years, she awoke without the familiar knot of fear that had always accompanied her mornings. Instead, there was an almost tangible sense of anticipation, a quiet heartbeat of possibility that thrummed through her very core. Today would be the first of many lessons with the Alpha King, the first step in a journey that would challenge her mind, her heart, and her very sense of self. As she descended the grand staircase, the polished marble beneath her feet echoing softly, she could feel the weight of the estate around her, its history, its secrets, its power. Every corner seemed to watch her, and for the first time, she did not feel small. She felt present, alive in a way that she had never allowed herself to feel before. The Alpha King awaited her in the library, a room vast beyond comprehension, filled with shelves that reached to the ceiling and ladders on rolling tracks that allowed access to the highest tomes. The scent of old parchment and ink filled the air, mingling with the faint trace of sandalwood from his cloak. He did not greet her immediately, simply observing as she stepped into the room, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "You may sit," he said, his voice calm but commanding, gesturing to a chair before a polished oak table. Lyra obeyed, her fingers curling nervously around the edges of the seat. There was a silence, one that hung heavy at first, and then the Alpha King began. "Your life has been deafened by rejection," he said, almost as if stating a fact rather than passing judgment. "By the world deeming you unworthy, unfit, unremarkable. But you are none of those things. You are here because I have seen something in you that no one else has, the potential to rise, to endure, and to become extraordinary." Lyra's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to deny it, to remind him of the years of loneliness and scorn, but no words came. Instead, she simply nodded, allowing his presence and his belief to wash over her like an unexpected warmth. "Our first lesson," he continued, "is not of etiquette or power. It is of understanding. Understanding yourself, understanding your place in this world, and understanding what you are capable of. He moved with fluid grace, placing a small, delicate book on the table before her. Its cover was unassuming, yet the leather was worn with care, as if it had been held by hands far greater than hers. Lyra opened it hesitantly. The pages were filled with exercises, reflections, and questions that demanded honesty she had never given herself. It was a mirror, a challenge, and a test all at once. And as she read, as she wrote, as she wrestled with thoughts and feelings long buried, she felt the faint stirrings of power within her, the realization that she could grow, that she could shape her own destiny rather than let it be dictated by the cruelty of others. Hours passed unnoticed. The morning sun gave way to the gentle warmth of afternoon, and still, Lyra worked, guided by the Alpha King's steady hand and unwavering gaze. He did not hover, he did not scold, he simply offered wisdom when necessary, allowing her to stumble, to struggle, to discover herself in the quiet way only the patient can facilitate. "You have more strength than you know," he said finally, his eyes softening. "More resilience, more courage. But strength alone is not enough. You must also learn to trust yourself, trust others, and trust that the world can be kinder than you have been taught to believe." The words resonated within her, echoing through the hollow chambers of self-doubt she had carried for years. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. She had spent so long hiding, so long shrinking, that to be seen, truly seen, and to be trusted was almost unbearable in its intensity. After a brief respite, the Alpha King guided her through the gardens once more. The fountains sparkled in the afternoon light, the petals of flowers glinting with dew. They walked in silence at first, the kind of silence that is both comforting and revealing, allowing thoughts to form, to be considered, to breathe. "Lyra," he said at last, "you will face those who doubt you. Those who will seek to diminish you, to remind you of who you were before. You must be Ray. Die, not with anger or fear, but with the quiet certainty of knowing your own worth. That certainty is your armor, and your mind is your sword." She looked up at him, the enormity of his words settling like stones in her chest. Could she truly rise above the girl who had been ignored, laughed at, rejected? Could she truly transform herself into someone strong enough to meet the world on her terms? She did not yet know, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Evening fell, painting the sky in a wash of pinks and blues, and still, Lyra could not rest. Her mind churned with lessons, reflections, and the stirring of something deeper, a connection, fragile but undeniable, to the Alpha King who had claimed her, guided her, and, in ways she did not yet understand, believed in her. As the stars appeared, scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, Lyra allowed herself a single, quiet thought: perhaps rejection had not been her fate at all. Perhaps it had been preparation. Preparation to become someone worthy, someone powerful, someone seen, not as the unwanted Omega, but as Lyra, extraordinary in her own right, and chosen by the Alpha King for reasons she would discover only in time. And somewhere within the sprawling halls of the estate, the Alpha King watched from a shadowed balcony, knowing that the smallest of sparks, when nurtured, could ignite a fire capable of illuminating the darkest corners of the world. For Lyra, the first day of understanding had ended. But the journey, fraught with challenge, discovery, and an unfolding love neither of them yet fully comprehended, had only just begun. The estate was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that carries both promise and unease. Even the birds seemed to tread lightly among the blossoming gardens, their songs careful and deliberate, as if they, too, sensed the subtle tension that lingered in the air. Lyra awoke with a heart still pounding from the intensity of her lessons with the Alpha King, a lingering thrill from the whispered possibility that she could truly grow into someone remarkable. Yet, as she looked at her reflection in the glass of her window, she felt the familiar sting of doubt. Her eyes, large and dark, mirrored her inner struggle. The girl who had been rejected, overlooked, dismissed, the Omega no one had wanted. Could she truly become more than the sum of those whispered judgments? Could she truly rise above the years of loneliness, of being unseen, of feeling inferior in a world designed to value only the strongest? The Alpha King's footsteps echoed in the hallway, precise and confident, drawing her attention. He appeared at her doorway, his presence as commanding as ever, yet tempered with an unusual softness that unsettled her. There was a thoughtfulness in his eyes she had not noticed before, a flicker of something private, almost imperceptible, that made her wonder what lay beneath the unyielding exterior he wore like armor. "Today," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "we will step beyond the safety of these walls. The world outside may not recognize your worth, Lyra, but it will reveal truths you must face. You cannot grow while hidden. Strength is tested only in the open, in the presence of challenge." Lyra's stomach tightened. The idea of venturing beyond the familiar corridors of the estate filled her with equal measures of excitement and fear. She had been sheltered, isolated by rejection, protected by invisibility. Yet the Alpha King's calm authority, the certainty in his tone, inspired a fragile courage within her. They descended the grand staircase together, their steps synchronized in a rhythm that spoke of unspoken understanding. Outside, the courtyard stretched endlessly, lined with flowering trees and polished fountains. Servants paused in their tasks to glance at them, curiosity and respect mingling in their eyes. But it was not their attention that mattered, it was the subtle, powerful awareness of the Alpha King that pressed against her, a presence both protective and demanding. They walked through the gates of the estate, stepping into a world alive with movement and expectation. Market stalls bustled with merchants calling out their wares, townsfolk going about their routines, and the distant clang of a blacksmith hammering at metal. The contrast was striking. Inside the estate, the world was orderly, controlled, predictable. Outside, it was chaotic, unpredictable, and full of eyes that judged without mercy. Lyra kept close, her fingers brushing against the smooth fabric of her gown, her heart hammering. She felt the whispers before she heard them, soft, disbelieving murmurs that carried her name with incredulity. "The rejected Omega? Here?" one woman hissed. "I thought she would disappear after last night." Another laughed, sharp and cruel, as if the mere act of her presence was absurd. The sting of recognition hit Lyra with unexpected force. For a moment, she faltered, shrinking into herself, the old shadows threatening to reclaim her. Yet the Alpha King's hand brushed hers lightly, a subtle, grounding touch that reminded her she was no longer alone in facing the world. "They will not define you," he said softly, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You define yourself. Let them doubt. Let them whisper. Your strength does not depend on their approval." Lyra drew in a shaky breath, the words settling like stones of reassurance in her chest. She lifted her chin, meeting the gazes of those who would judge her, not with fear, but with quiet defiance. In that moment, a subtle transformation began, not not flashy, but undeniable. She walked taller, her steps more certain, her eyes brighter, reflecting the inner fire the Alpha King had begun to kindle within her. The day passed in a mixture of lessons and exploration. He guided her through the town, teaching her to observe, to understand the subtleties of human behavior, the signals of respect and deception, of opportunity and danger. Each interaction, each fleeting glance or gesture, became a small lesson, a piece of knowledge that would build the foundation of her transformation. Yet even in the midst of growth, shadows of the past lingered. Lyra caught sight of familiar faces, those who had once mocked her, dismissed her, whispered cruel rumors about her worth. Their stares were sharp, questioning, and she felt the familiar weight of rejection press against her heart. For a heartbeat, the old fear threatened to overwhelm her. But the Alpha King's presence beside her was like an anchor in a storm. He did not intervene, did not shield her from the world's scrutiny. Instead, he allowed her to face it, to endure, and to rise above it. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon once more, Lyra felt a subtle but undeniable shift within herself. She was no longer merely the rejected Omega. She was becoming Lyra, the Omega chosen, the girl seen, the woman who could stand in the world and not be broken by it. Returning to the estate, the night wrapped around them like a protective cloak. The gardens glimmered in the moonlight, fountains reflecting stars that seemed to applaud her silent victories. The Alpha King led her back to her chambers, and for the first time, Lyra felt a deep, unspoken bond forming between them. A connection built not on pity or obligation, but on trust, recognition, and the beginning stirrings of something more profound. As she lay in her bed that night, exhaustion and exhilaration mingling, she reflected on the day. The whispers of doubt, the glances of judgment, the lingering shadows of the past, all had been met with a quiet resilience she had never known she possessed. And she realized, with a thrill that warmed her from within, that this was only the beginning. The world would test her, challenge her, and try to diminish her. But for the first time in her life, Lyra understood that rejection had not defined her, it had prepared her. And with the Alpha King at her side, she felt the faint but undeniable certainty that she could rise above it all. Somewhere in the shadows of the estate, the Alpha King observed her from afar, noting the subtle straightening of her shoulders, the spark in her eyes. He knew the path ahead would not be easy, that danger, jealousy, and intrigue would test both their resolve. Yet he also knew this. The girl beside him, once overlooked and discarded, was beginning to realize the extraordinary strength that had always been hers. And in that realization, a story of love, resilience, and triumph quietly began to unfold. The dawn crept gently across the estate, brushing the high towers and sprawling gardens with soft, golden light. Lyra awoke to the quiet hum of the morning, the distant clatter of servants preparing the halls, the gentle ripple of water from the fountains outside, and the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a cool breeze. She lay still for a moment, absorbing the tranquility, but beneath it stirred a growing awareness. Her life had shifted irreversibly, and with it came responsibilities and challenges she had never faced before. The Alpha King was already waiting in the main hall, a figure of calm authority amidst the intricate opulence of the estate. His presence was unwavering, yet there was a subtle shift in his demeanor today, a kind of calculation, a measured observation that set Lyra on edge, though in a way that was not frightening, only compelling. It was as if he was testing her, not with cruelty, but with the quiet expectation that she would rise to meet the standards he believed she could achieve. "You are ready," he said, his voice low, deliberate, carrying the weight of certainty. "Today, your lesson is not in knowledge, nor in observation. Today, you will learn trust. Not the trust others place in you, but the trust you must place in yourself, in your instincts, and in me." Lyra's heart fluttered at his words. Trust had been a foreign concept her entire life. She had trusted only cautiously, tentatively, and often painfully. The world had taught her to doubt, to retreat, to shrink whenever expectation or judgment approached. And yet, the Alpha King's presence, firm and steady, seemed to promise something she had never known, that trust could be safe, that it could be empowering, that it could ignite strength she had not yet discovered. They began with the familiar, walking through the estate's gardens, where the sun highlighted every curve of foliage and fountain with delicate clarity. But this morning, the gardens felt different, less like a sanctuary, more like a proving ground. He directed her to navigate through the winding paths with her eyes closed, relying on instinct, memory, and guidance alone. Lyra's first attempts were hesitant, faltering. Her hands brushed against leaves, the edges of stone benches, and the occasional startled bird. Each stumble sent a pulse of anxiety through her, a whisper of doubt that threatened to drown the fragile courage she carried. "Steady yourself," he instructed, his voice calm, yet carrying a subtle edge that demanded attention. "Do not fear the unknown. Anticipate it, trust yourself." With each step, she felt the tremor of Ar transform into a strange exhilaration. Her senses sharpened, the sound of water gurgling over stones, the faint scent of jasmine carried on the breeze, the subtle shifts in terrain beneath her feet. Every movement became deliberate, every decision calculated, every instinct tested and refined. And with it, she realized something remarkable. Trust was not about surrender. It was about control. It was about knowing that even in uncertainty, she had the power to endure, to navigate, and to prevail. After hours in the garden, the Alpha King introduced another trial, a social test. They ventured into the nearby town, walking among crowds that had once mocked her. The whispers and sidelong glances returned, sharper now, as if the town itself sensed the transformation she was undergoing. Some attempted to belittle her, some offered smirks of derision, and others simply stared in disbelief. But Lyra, guided by the lessons of trust and resilience, met every challenge with quiet composure. She lifted her chin, held her gaze steady, and allowed herself to move with the poise the Alpha King had been cultivating within her. The old fear that would have caused her to shrink away no longer held sway. Instead, she felt a subtle surge of strength, a recognition that she could meet the world on her terms, not as the rejected Omega, but as someone chosen, empowered, and capable. "You are learning quickly," the Alpha King observed, his voice carrying a rare note of approval. "But remember, growth is not linear. Doubt will return, danger will arise, and you will be tested in ways both subtle and severe. What matters is not that you avoid failure, but that you rise after it." Evening fell as they returned to the estate, painting the sky in deep purples and fiery oranges. The world seemed to hum with possibility, yet shadows of doubt lingered on the periphery of Lyra's mind. She knew that not everyone would accept her newfound strength, and that jealousy, envy, and malice would surely follow. But for the first time, she did not fear them entirely. She had learned that with trust in herself and in those who truly valued her, she could navigate even the most treacherous currents. That night, as she prepared for rest, the Alpha King entered her chambers once more, a quiet intensity in his gaze. "You are changing," he said softly, "but so am I. The world has seen me as a king, a figure of authority, untouchable and resolute. But in you, I see someone who challenges me, who makes me question, who teaches me that strength can also be gentle, and power can be shared." Lyra felt a tremor of emotion ripple through her, a warmth that reached places in her heart she had long abandoned. His words were not just guidance, they were recognition, affirmation, and the quiet stirring something deeper, something unspoken yet profoundly felt. As she lay in bed, staring at the flickering shadows cast by candlelight, Lyra allowed herself a tentative hope. Perhaps trust was not a weakness. Perhaps love and connection, though frightening and unpredictable, could be a source of strength. And perhaps, in this journey with the Alpha King, she could not only reclaim herself from the shadows of rejection, but also discover a love and power she had never dared to imagine. The estate grew silent around her, but in her heart, a storm of possibility raged, a storm that promised challenges, triumphs, and a future radiant with hope. And somewhere in the quiet halls, the Alpha King watched, knowing that each trial, each lesson, each moment of growth was shaping not just Lyra, but the extraordinary bond that would define both their lives forever. The estate stirred with life as morning light spilled across its grand courtyards. Birds chirped in the gardens, fountains gurgled as if echoing the heartbeat of the land, and the scent of dew-laden roses filled the air. Lyra rose from her bed, the soft sheets falling away like the remnants of her old life. She felt a quiet tension beneath the anticipation of a new day, an awareness that today would test her in ways that her lessons within the safety of the estate had never prepared her for. The Alpha King awaited her in the main hall, his presence as imposing as ever. Yet beneath his calm exterior was a subtle edge, a flicker of calculation in his dark eyes that suggested he had plans for the day that would push her beyond her comfort, beyond even the growing confidence she had begun to cultivate. "Today, Lyra," he said, his voice steady but edged with purpose, "you will face your first true challenge. Not one of books or gardens, but one of society, perception, and cunning. There are those in the surrounding towns who will not welcome you. They will see your presence as an affront, as a disruption to the established order. You must navigate this world with poise, intelligence, and courage." Lyra's stomach tightened at his words. The thought of confronting open hostility, of facing those who had once scorned her, made her pulse quicken. But beneath the apprehension was a flicker of resolve. She had been rejected, dismissed, and overlooked countless times. She had survived the whispers, the laughter, and the disdain. Perhaps, she thought, she could rise above it all, not with fear, but with the quiet power she had begun to cultivate under the Alpha King's guidance. They left the estate together, stepping into the bustling streets of the nearby town. Market stalls overflowed with vibrant fabrics, fresh produce, and the clamor of merchants hawking their wares. Townsfolk moved with purpose, their eyes sharp, our conversations punctuated with laughter, argument, and curiosity. Yet Lyra sensed the undercurrent of scrutiny, the subtle shifts in posture, the quickened glances, the whispers that danced on the wind. She was being watched, judged, measured against a standard she had once believed impossible to reach. The first confrontation came swiftly. A group of women, faces painted with disdain, approached, their steps deliberate, their words sharp. "So, this is the girl the Alpha King claims?" one sneered. "The rejected Omega who thinks she belongs in his world?" Lyra felt her heart leap, a surge of old fear threatening to pull her into retreat. Yet she steadied herself, recalling the lessons of trust, resilience, and inner strength. She lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering, her voice calm and clear. "I am Lyra," she said. "And I am here because the Alpha King chose me, not for your approval, nor your understanding, but because I am capable." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some eyes widened in shock, others narrowed in challenge. The Alpha King remained at her side, silent but commanding, his mere presence lending her words weight and authority. As they continued through the market, more obstacles presented themselves. A merchant tried to cheat her with a price far above its value. A young noble attempted to humiliate her with a snide remark. Each situation tested her composure, her ability to remain calm under scrutiny, and her growing sense of self-worth. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lyra began to notice a change, not just in how others regarded her, but in how she regarded herself. She was no longer shrinking from the world, she was beginning to stand within it. By mid-afternoon, the trials culminated in a subtle, yet profound, confrontation. A rival noble family, long envious of the Alpha King's influence, sought to publicly undermine Lyra, questioning her legitimacy and worth. Their words were sharp, designed to wound, to shame, to dismantle the fragile confidence she had begun to build. For a moment, Lyra felt the weight of rejection press down upon her chest. The voices of her past failures threatened to drown out the calm resolve the Alpha King had instilled in her. But then she remembered his lessons: trust, self-belief, courage. She raised her voice, steady and unwavering, and spoke not with anger, but with clarity. "I am Lyra," she said, her gaze meeting each pair of doubting eyes. "I am chosen, not because I am flawless, but because I am resilient. You may attempt to diminish me, but I will not shrink. I will not falter. And I will not be unseen." A stunned silence followed. The Alpha King's gaze met hers, a faint nod of approval acknowledging not just her words, but the courage it took to speak them. Slowly, grudging respect replaced the scorn. Full expressions of the crowd. Whispers shifted from derision to curiosity, admiration even, though unspoken. The day ended with a quiet walk back to the estate. The sun had begun its descent, painting the horizon with deep oranges and purples, the world awash in the glow of twilight. Lyra's shoulders were straight, her steps confident, yet beneath the triumph, she felt the lingering exhaustion of a day spent not merely surviving, but asserting herself in the world for the first time. That evening, the Alpha King allowed her a moment of solitude before speaking again. "You have done well today," he said softly, a rare warmth threading his voice. "The world will test you, as it always has, but you are learning to meet it on your terms. Strength, Lyra, is not measured in dominance alone, but in the courage to stand, even when the world wishes to see you fall." Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, a quiet joy mingled with the knowledge that she was changing, not only in the eyes of the world but within herself. The path ahead would not be easy. Jealousy, danger, and intrigue were inevitable. Yet for the first time, she felt prepared, emboldened by the knowledge that she was no longer merely the rejected Omega. She was Lyra, the Omega chosen, resilient, and beginning to claim the life she had long been denied. As the moon rose over the estate, casting silver light across the gardens and fountains, Lyra allowed herself to rest, her heart swelling with quiet pride. The Alpha King watched from the shadows, knowing that today marked a turning point, not only in her journey of growth and confidence but in the bond between them, a connection forged through trials, trust, and the subtle stirrings of something neither of them had yet dared to name. Night had draped the estate in a cloak of silvery calm, the moonlight spilling across marble floors and gilded balconies, painting shadows that danced like silent spectators of a story still unfolding. Lyra stood at her window, her eyes tracing the distant hills that shimmered under the soft glow, her thoughts tangled in the events of the past days. The world outside had tested her courage, her patience, and her resolve. Each challenge, each encounter, had carved a new layer of strength into her, yet she could not ignore the whispering doubt that lingered in the quiet moments, the fear that her newfound confidence might still be fragile, that the trials she faced were far from over. The estate was unusually still that night, yet she sensed movement elsewhere, subtle and deliberate. It was as if the shadows themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something hidden to emerge. Lyra's hand pressed lightly against the window pane, feeling the cool glass beneath her palm, and she realized that tonight, her last sons would take a different form. Tonight, she would confront not only the world outside, but the secrets that even the Alpha King himself had not yet revealed. He appeared quietly behind her, his presence as silent as the moonlight that draped the room. She turned, startled, yet not afraid. With him, fear was a foreign, unwelcome companion. There was only anticipation, the kind that made her heart race not from anxiety, but from the thrilling uncertainty of what was to come. Lyra, he began, his voice low and measured, carrying a weight that demanded attention. Tonight, you must see the world beyond its surface. You must understand that power, loyalty, and truth are not always apparent. What is hidden often holds the greatest significance. He led her to the estate's lower gardens, a secluded area rarely touched by the light of day. Moonlight reflected off the fountain's still waters, casting ethereal patterns across the perfectly trimmed hedges. The air was thick with the fragrance of night-blooming flowers, their subtle perfume mingling with the distant scent of the forest beyond. "Follow me," he instructed, and Lyra did so, her steps cautious yet confident, guided by the rhythm of his stride. The Alpha King's lessons had taught her to trust herself, to trust him, and to trust the unknown, not blindly, but with awareness, with the careful discernment of one who had learned to navigate shadows. They reached a secluded alcove, where a soft rustling disturbed the otherwise serene night. Figures emerged from the darkness, envoys from rival territories, bearing grievances and hidden agendas. They regarded Lyra with curiosity, suspicion, and the faintest trace of disdain. The Alpha King's posture did not waver. He was a bastion of calm authority, and his gaze fell upon her with a measured intensity that spoke volumes. "You will speak," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. Not as a subordinate, not as one who must plead for respect, but as Lyra, the Omega chosen, capable, and worthy. "Your words carry power. Use them wisely." Lyra's heart thundered in her chest, yet she felt the quiet strength he had instilled in her. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and allowed her voice to flow, steady and deliberate. She addressed the envoys with poise, answering their challenges with clarity and subtle authority, her words weaving respect and quiet dominance in a way that even she found surprising. The night deepened, and the envoys retreated, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. Lyra's chest heaved with the effort, her mind racing from the intensity of the encounter. The Alpha King stepped closer, his gaze softening, and he placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You have done well," he murmured, and for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to feel the full weight of her accomplishment. "You have faced hidden threats, maintained composure, and demonstrated not only courage but discernment. This is the path to true strength." They walked back to the estate in silence, the moonlight guiding their steps. Lyra's mind churned with questions, about the envoys, about the hidden motives of those who would challenge her, and about the mysterious depth of the Alpha King's world that she had only begun to glimpse. Yet beneath it all, there was a growing certainty that she was no longer merely a passive participant in her own life. She was a force, quietly rising, slowly claiming the space that had long been denied to her. Back in her chambers, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Each challenge, each encounter, had left its mark. She was weary, yet invigorated. She had begun to understand that power was not only about dominance or fear, it was about resilience, perception, and the courage to stand unwavering in the face of uncertainty. And most importantly, she was learning that love, trust, and connection could coexist with strength, creating a foundation far more formidable than fear or submission ever could. The Alpha King lingered in the doorway, his dark eyes softened by an emotion that Lyra could not yet name. "The world is not done with us," he said quietly. "There will be trials, temptations, and threats. But you are learning what it means to rise, to claim, and to protect. And I am learning alongside you." Lyra felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that was deepening between them. It was no longer merely master and student, Alpha and Omega. It was something more intricate, something delicate yet unbreakable, forged through trust, courage, and the silent understanding of one another's strengths and vulnerabilities. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the soft whispers of the estate and the distant rustle of the gardens, Lyra realized that her journey was far from over. Danger, intrigue, and discovery awaited her at every turn. Yet she no longer faced the unknown with fear. She faced it with determination, with wisdom, and with the growing certainty that she was no longer the rejected Omega. She was Lyra, the Omega chosen, resilient, and ready to embrace the unfolding story of her life, alongside the Alpha King who had seen, and believed in, her extraordinary potential. The morning air carried a chill that spoke of the changing season, brushing against the high towers of the estate with a soft, insistent whisper. Lyra awoke to the delicate rustle of leaves outside her window, the golden light of dawn spilling across the floor, illuminating the quiet beauty of her chambers. Today was unlike the days before. There was a tensency in the air, subtle yet undeniable, that hinted at the stirrings of conflict beyond the safety of her growing confidence. As she descended the sweeping staircase, the Alpha King awaited her in the main hall, a figure of calm authority against the backdrop of opulent marble and gilded arches. His gaze fell upon her with measured intensity, and Lyra felt that familiar mix of anticipation and awe that had become a constant companion in their days together. Yet today, his expression carried an additional weight, a shadow of concern that made her pulse quicken. "There are those who have taken notice," he began, his voice steady, yet carrying an edge that demanded attention. "Not all eyes on you are benevolent. Some will attempt to undermine, to belittle, to sow discord. You must be vigilant. Your strength, patience, and discernment will be tested more sharply than before." Lyra's chest tightened at his words. She had already faced whispers, scorn, and challenges from townsfolk and minor nobles, yet this warning suggested a deeper threat, a rival whose ambition and envy were powerful enough to disrupt not only her path but potentially the influence of the Alpha King himself. The idea of confrontation made her stomach twist, yet beneath the apprehension, a spark of determination ignited. She would not falter. She would not retreat. Their first encounter with the subtle ripples of rivalry came in the estate's morning assembly, where nobles and influential figures gathered to discuss matters of trade, allegiance, and social standing. A young, strikingly arrogant noblewoman approached, her eyes sharp, calculating, and filled with thinly veiled disdain. Lyra could sense the undercurrent of jealousy, a recognition that her rising presence, chosen by the Alpha King, disrupted expectations and threatened long-held hierarchies. "You must be the infamous Omega," the noblewoman said, her tone a careful balance of curiosity and challenge. "The one who thinks herself worthy of his attention." Lyra's heartbeat quickened, but she recalled the lessons of the past weeks, the importance of composure, the quiet power of confidence, and the necessity of trusting herself. She met the gaze of the woman before her, her voice calm, steady, and imbued with the quiet authority she was only beginning to realize she possessed. "I am Lyra," she said, "and my presence here is neither arrogance nor presumption. I am here because I have been chosen for my strength, my resilience, and my character. Not because of your opinion, nor the judgment of others." A ripple of shock passed through the assembly. Some noblemen whispered to one another, impressed by her poise, others exchanged glances filled with envy. The Alpha King's eyes met hers, and in that brief, silent acknowledgement, Lyra felt a surge of courage. She was no longer the rejected Omega. She was someone who could hold her own, someone whose words carried weight, whose presence commanded respect, even if begrudgingly. After the assembly, the Alpha King guided her to the gardens, where the air was filled with the faint scent of roses and the soft rustle of leaves. "Strength is not only in confrontation," he said quietly, "but in knowing when to act, when to observe, and when to hold your ground. Today you have done well, but the path ahead will require not only courage, but strategy." Lyra listened, absorbing his words, feeling the subtle layers of mentorship that went beyond mere instruction. She understood that her journey was not simply about survival or acceptance, it was about mastering the balance between vulnerability and strength, compassion and resolve, perception and action. As the day progressed, subtle intrigues emerged, messages intercepted, minor slights orchestrated, and whispers meant to destabilize her confidence. Each incident tested her composure and forced her to engage with the world in ways she had never imagined. She relied on the patience, wisdom, and silent guidance of the Alpha King, but she also discovered her own voice, her own intuition, and her capacity to navigate the treacherous currents of envy and ambition. Evening fell with a soft, lingering glow, and Lyra found herself alone in the estate's private library, reflecting on the events of the day. The challenges she faced were subtle yet pervasive, requiring not only resilience but a careful awareness of human nature, power, and perception. And yet, for the first time, she felt an exhilarating sense of mastery, an awareness that she was becoming more than the girl who had once been invisible, dismissed, and scorned. The Alpha King entered quietly, his eyes dark with both thoughtfulness and admiration. "You have grown today," he said softly. "Not just in courage, but in wisdom. The world will test you endlessly, yet you are beginning to see that strength is not only in standing tall, but in knowing when to bend without breaking, when to speak without yielding, and when to observe without faltering." Lyra felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a quiet pride mingled with a growing affection. The bond between them, once simple in its beginnings, was evolving, subtle, profound, and unspoken, threading through every glance, every word, every shared silence. She realized that the Alpha King's presence was no longer merely guidance, it was partnership, trust, and a nascent understanding that stretched beyond titles, beyond status, and beyond even the expectations of society. As the moon rose high above the estate, casting silver light across gardens and fountains, Lyra allowed herself a quiet reflection. She had faced the first subtle test of rivalry, and though it had been exhausting, it had also revealed the depth of her resilience, her discernment, and the growing strength within her. She was no longer the rejected Omega. She was Lyra, the Omega chosen, capable, and beginning to claim the life, the respect, and perhaps even the love she had long been denied. And in the quiet shadows of the estate, the Alpha King watched, knowing that each whispered challenge, each subtle test, was shaping not only Lyra's strength, but the extraordinary bond that was quietly, irrevocably, forming between them. A bond that would carry them both through trials, triumphs, and the unfolding story of a love neither had yet dared to name. The morning dawned heavy with anticipation, the sky painted in muted shades of gray that foretold change. The estate, usually serene and orderly, seemed to hold its breath, aware that the day ahead carried a weight far beyond ordinary routine. Lyra awoke to a restless energy in her chest, a fluttering that was part excitement, part unease. Today, she sensed, would test not only her resilience but the very strength of the bond she shared with the Alpha King. Descending the grand staircase, Lyra noticed subtle shifts in the servant's demeanor, glances exchanged in quiet concern, whispers she could almost hear if she focused hard enough. The Alpha King stood in the main hall, his presence as steady as ever, though the usual calm in his dark eyes was replaced by a quiet intensity. He motioned for her to approach, and Lyra felt the familiar mix of awe and apprehension stir within her. "Lyra," he began, his voice low, deliberate, and filled with an unmistakable urgency, "the world beyond these walls grows restless. There are forces that wish to challenge not only your position, but our influence. You must be prepared. Today, you will face trials that will test your judgment, your courage, and your heart." Lyra's pulse quickened. She had faced ridicule, rivalry, and social scrutiny, but the Alpha King's words suggested something more dangerous, something unpredictable. Yet beneath the fear was a quiet, simmering determination. She had grown so much, she had learned to trust herself, to navigate challenges with poise, and to meet the world with confidence she had never known. Perhaps, she thought, she was ready for whatever lay ahead. The day began with the subtle yet tense meeting of influential figures in the town square. Merchants, nobles, and envoys from distant lands gathered, their conversations hushed and eyes sharp, the air thick with expectation. Lyra noticed a group of familiar adversaries from previous encounters, their expressions clouded with jealousy and thinly veiled malice. They whispered among themselves, clearly plotting to undermine her praise and question her legitimacy. The Alpha King moved beside her, a silent pillar of strength, his gaze sweeping over the assembly with quiet command. "Remember," he said softly, "authority is not claimed through fear alone. It is earned through perception, patience, and the courage to act when necessary. Today, your words, actions, and choices will define you." Lyra stepped forward, heart-pounding, yet her steps measured, deliberate. She addressed the assembly with poise, countering subtle provocations with calm authority and measured logic. Each word, each gesture, was an assertion of her growing strength. The murmurs of doubt and derision began to shift into whispers of curiosity, admiration, and cautious respect. Yet the trials were only beginning. A minor noble, resentful of the Alpha King's choice, approached with a challenge that bordered on hostility. His words were sharp, designed to provoke, to unsettle, to test her composure. Lyra felt a flicker of old fear, a shadow of the rejected Omega she had once been. But she remembered the lessons of the past weeks: trust, resilience, discernment, and met the challenge not with anger, but with quiet confidence. "You may question me," she said, her voice steady, "but my presence here is not for your approval. I am chosen, capable, and prepared to face challenges, not with submission, but with resolve. Judge me as you will, but do not mistake my grace for weakness." A stunned silence followed. The noble's expression faltered, his challenge deflected by her calm authority. The Alpha King's gaze met hers, a flicker of approval hidden beneath his usual stoic demeanor. Lyra felt a rush of quiet triumph, the affirmation of her growing strength blending with a deeper, more subtle awareness. Her heart, too, was stirring in response to his presence, his faith in her, and the unspoken connection that had been forming between them. The afternoon brought a test of endurance and courage. The Alpha King led her to the outskirts of the estate, where a training ground had been prepared. Here, subtle exercises were designed to refine her instincts, sharpen her reflexes, and cultivate the quiet assertiveness that power demanded. Each challenge was tailored not to overwhelm, but to push her limits, to reveal hidden strengths, and to deepen her understanding of herself. Lyra faltered at times, doubt flickering in her chest, yet each misstep became a lesson, each hesitation a stepping stone toward mastery. The Alpha King guided her with patience and precision, correcting her, encouraging her, and allowing her to discover her own potential. With each passing hour, she felt herself transform, not simply in skill, but in self-belief, in the quiet assertion of her presence, and in the understanding that she could meet both challenge and scrutiny without fear. As twilight fell, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Lyra and the Alpha King walked through the estate gardens. The fountains glimmered in the fading light, reflecting the subtle shift in her own confidence and power. "You have done well today," he said softly, his voice threaded with a rare warmth. "The world will continue to test you, but remember this: your strength is not only in what you endure, but in the courage to rise, to act, and to embrace the bonds that give you power." Lyra's heart swelled with emotion. She realized that her journey was no longer solitary. She was not merely surviving, she was growing, learning, and beginning to claim her place in the world. And within the quiet intensity of the Alpha King's presence, she felt something deeper stirring, an unspoken understanding, a trust, and the first faint flicker of love that neither of them had yet named aloud. As the stars emerged, scattered across the velvet sky, Lyra allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. The trials of the day had tested her body, mind, and spirit, yet they had also revealed the extraordinary depth of her own resilience. She was no longer the rejected Omega, invisible and dismissed. She was Lyra, the Omega chosen, strong, perceptive, and beginning to awaken to the profound, uncharted territory of the heart. And in the quiet halls of the estate, the Alpha King watched, aware that each challenge, each trial, and each shared silence was shaping not only Lyra's strength, but the extraordinary bond between them, a bond that promised love, trust, and triumph over every shadow the world dared to cast. The dawn broke gently over the estate, spilling golden light across the towers, gardens, and marble courtyards. For Lyra, this morning carried a weight unlike any before, not one of fear, doubt, or uncertainty, but of anticipation and quiet triumph. The journey that had begun with rejection, loneliness, and whispered scorn had led her here, to a moment where every lesson, every trial, every challenge she had faced now converged into a sense of profound clarity. She was no longer merely the rejected Omega. The world had not only begun to recognize her strength, but she herself had fully embraced it. Her chambers were bathed in sunlight, the warmth mingling with a subtle, almost electric awareness in her chest. The Alpha King had already left for the day's engagements, yet a promise lingered in his absence, the promise of guidance, protection, and the unspoken connection that had grown between them over countless days and nights. Lyra rose, her movements deliberate and confident, a reflection of the inner transformation that had taken root. Every step she took now carried assurance, every glance reflected strength, and every breath seemed infused with the quiet power she had fought to claim. The morning passed in preparation, for today would not be ordinary. Word had reached the estate that rival nobles, still embittered by her ascent, planned to challenge the Alpha King's authority directly, seeking to undermine both him and her standing. But Lyra felt no fear. She had faced scorn, rivalry, and whispers meant to weaken her. Today, she understood fully that her strength was not dependent on the absence of opposition, but on her courage, her wisdom, and the unshakable trust she now held in herself, and in the Alpha King. When they gathered in the Grand Hall to face the challengers, Lyra's entrance caused an immediate stir. Noble eyes widened in disbelief. Murmurs fluttered through the room like restless birds. She walked forward steadily, head held high, her gaze unwavering. There was no hesitation, no tremor of doubt, only the quiet command of presence that demanded recognition. The challengers began with calculated words, designed to provoke and belittle, to make her falter before an assembly that had long doubted her. Yet Lyra met each challenge not with anger, but with clarity and confidence. Her voice, steady and authoritative, cut through the tension. "I am Lyra," she declared, each syllable deliberate, resonant, and filled with unwavering certainty. "I am chosen not by chance, but because I possess the strength, resilience, and discernment required to stand beside the Alpha King. Those who attempt to undermine me will see not weakness, but resolve. I will not be defined by your judgment or your envy. I am here to claim my place, with honor and conviction." A silence followed, dense and powerful. The Alpha King's dark eyes met hers, and in that glance, a silent acknowledgement passed between them. It was a look of shared understanding, respect, and, unspoken, yet profoundly felt, love. Lyra felt a surge of exhilaration, a validation not from the whispers of the past, but from her own unwavering sense of self. The challengers faltered, unable to withstand the combination of her composure and the Alpha King's presence beside her. One by one, their arguments dissolved into murmurs, their intentions exposed, their influence diminished. Lyra realized in that moment that power was not merely about authority or dominance. It was about courage, integrity, and the ability to command respect without yielding to fear. After the assembly, the Alpha King led her to the estate gardens, where the sunlight dappled through the trees, casting playful patterns across the pathways. The air was rich with the scent of blossoms, and the fountains shimmered like liquid silver. For the first time, Lyra felt the full weight of accomplishment settle within her, not the fleeting pride of passing a single tea. Real, but the profound fulfillment of a journey completed, of challenges met, and of a destiny embraced. "You have done more than survive, Lyra," the Alpha King said, his voice low, carrying the rare warmth he reserved for moments of truth. "You have risen, not only in the eyes of the world but in your own. You are no longer the Omega overlooked and discarded. You are extraordinary, and today you have proven it." Lyra's heart swelled, a quiet joy mingling with a deep, tender emotion. She had longed for acceptance, for recognition, and for a sense of belonging. Yet what she felt now went beyond all of that. It was the profound satisfaction of knowing she had claimed her power, her identity, and her place in the world on her own terms, guided but not defined by the Alpha King's hand. And then, in the quiet intimacy of the gardens, under the warmth of the afternoon sun, the Alpha King took her hand. His touch was gentle yet commanding, and Lyra felt the full depth of connection between them, the shared trust, the growing affection, and the unspoken love that had been simmering through every glance, every lesson, and every challenge. "Lyra," he said, his voice rich with sincerity, "you are not only chosen but cherished. Your strength, your courage, and your heart have become intertwined with mine. Will you allow me to walk this path with you, not as a king to an Omega, but as a partner, as someone who sees you fully and loves you wholly?" Lyra's eyes glistened, tears threatening to spill not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming joy of fulfillment. She nodded, her voice steady though tinged with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, "I will walk this path with you, with trust, with love, and with all that I am." The estate seemed to exhale in that moment, the gardens alive with the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle shimmer of fountains. Lyra had emerged from the shadows of rejection and scorn into the light of recognition, love, and triumph. The Alpha King's hand in hers was not merely a symbol of connection. It was a bond forged through trials, trust, and the unwavering acknowledgement of her extraordinary strength. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light across the estate, Lyra realized that her journey had transformed her in every way. She was no longer the rejected Omega, she was Lyra, the Omega chosen, powerful, courageous, and deeply loved. And alongside the Alpha King, she knew that together they would face every challenge, embrace every triumph, and write the next chapters of their lives in unshakable unity and joy. The night fell softly, wrapping the estate in a blanket of peace and serenity. In the quiet glow of lanterns and moonlight, Lyra and the Alpha King walked hand in hand, a perfect balance of strength and tenderness. The war, outside, with its whispers and shadows, could wait. For in that moment, they had everything they had ever desired: trust, love, and the promise of a future built together. The dawn broke gently over the estate, spilling golden light across the towers, gardens, and marble courtyards. For Lyra, this morning carried a weight unlike any before, not one of fear, doubt, or uncertainty, but of anticipation and quiet triumph. The journey that had begun with rejection, loneliness, and whispered scorn had led her here, to a moment where every lesson, every trial, every challenge she had faced now converged into a sense of profound clarity. She was no longer merely the rejected Omega. The world had not only begun to recognize her strength, but she herself had fully embraced it. Her chambers were bathed in sunlight, the warmth mingling with a subtle, almost electric awareness in her chest. The Alpha King had already left for the day's engagements, yet a promise lingered in his absence, the promise of guidance, protection, and the unspoken connection that had grown between them over countless days and nights. Lyra rose, her movements deliberate and confident, a reflection of the inner transformation that had taken root. Every step she took now carried assurance, every glance reflected strength, and every breath seemed infused with the quiet power she had fought to claim. The morning passed in preparation, for today would not be ordinary. Word had reached the estate that rival nobles, still embittered by her ascent, planned to challenge the Alpha King's authority directly, seeking to undermine both him and her standing. But Lyra felt no fear. She had faced scorn, rivalry, and whispers meant to weaken her. Today, she understood fully that her strength was not dependent on the absence of opposition, but on her courage, her wisdom, and the unshakable trust she now held in herself, and in the Alpha King. When they gathered in the grand hall to face the challengers, Lyra's entrance caused an immediate stir. Noble eyes widened in disbelief. Murmurs fluttered through the room like restless birds. She walked forward steadily, head held high, her gaze unwavering. There was no hesitation, no tremor of doubt, only the quiet command of presence that demanded recognition. The challengers began with calculated words, designed to provoke and belittle, to make her falter before an assembly that had long doubted her. Yet Lyra met each challenge not with anger, but with clarity and confidence. Her voice, steady and authoritative, cut through the tension. "I am Lyra," she declared, each syllable deliberate, resonant, and filled with unwavering certainty. "I am chosen not by chance, but because I possess the strength, resilience, and discernment required to stand beside the Alpha King. Those who attempt to undermine me will see not weakness, but resolve. I will not be defined by your judgment or your envy. I am here to claim my place, with honor and conviction." A silence followed, dense and powerful. The Alpha King's dark eyes met hers, and in that glance, a silent acknowledgement passed between them. It was a look of shared understanding, respect, and, unspoken, yet profoundly felt, love. Lyra felt a surge of exhilaration, a validation not from the whispers of the past, but from her own unwavering sense of self. The challengers faltered, unable to withstand the combination of her composure and the Alpha King's presence beside her. One by one, their arguments dissolved into murmurs, their intentions exposed, their influence diminished. Lyra realized in that moment that power was not merely about authority or dominance. It was about courage, integrity, and the ability to command respect without yielding to fear. After the assembly, the Alpha King led her to the estate gardens, where the sunlight dappled through the trees, casting playful patterns across the pathways. The air was rich with the scent of blossoms, and the fountains shimmered like liquid silver. For the first time, Lyra felt the full weight of accomplishment settle within her, not the fleeting pride of passing a single trial, but the profound fulfillment of a journey completed, of challenges met, and of a destiny embraced. "You have done more than survive, Lyra," the Alpha King said, his voice low, carrying the rare warmth he reserved for moments of truth. "You have risen, not only in the eyes of the world but in your own. You are no longer the Omega overlooked and discarded. You are extraordinary, and today you have proven it." Lyra's heart swelled, a quiet joy mingling with a deep, tender emotion. She had longed for acceptance, for recognition, and for a sense of belonging. Yet what she felt now went beyond all of that. It was the profound satisfaction of knowing she had claimed her power, her identity, and her place in the world on her own terms, guided but not defined by the Alpha King's hand. And then, in the quiet intimacy of the gardens, under the warmth of the afternoon sun, the Alpha King took her hand. His touch was gentle yet commanding, and Lyra felt the full depth of connection between them, the shared trust, the growing affection, and the unspoken love that had been simmering through every glance, every lesson, and every challenge. "Lyra," he said, his voice rich with sincerity, "you are not only chosen but cherished. Your strength, your courage, and your heart have become intertwined with mine. Will you allow me to walk this path with you, not as a king to an Omega, but as a partner, as someone who sees you fully and loves you wholly?" Lyra's eyes glistened, tears threatening to spill not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming joy of fulfillment. She nodded, her voice steady though tinged with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, "I will walk this path with you, with trust, with love, and with all that I am." The estate seemed to exhale in that moment, the gardens alive with the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle shimmer of fountains. Lyra had emerged from the shadows of rejection and scorn into the light of recognition, love, and triumph. The Alpha King's hand in hers was not merely a symbol of connection. It was a bond forged through trials, trust, and the unwavering acknowledgement of her extraordinary strength. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting golden light across the estate, Lyra realized that her journey had transformed her in every way. She was no longer the rejected Omega, she was Lyra, the Omega chosen, powerful, courageous, and deeply loved. And alongside the Alpha King, she knew that together they would face every challenge, embrace every triumph, and write the next chapters of their lives in unshakable unity and joy. The night fell softly, wrapping the estate in a blanket of peace and serenity. In the quiet glow of lanterns and moonlight, Lyra and the Alpha King walked hand in hand, a perfect balance of strength and tenderness. The world outside, with its whispers and shadows, could wait. For in that moment, they had everything they had ever desired: trust, love, and the promise of a future built together.